around my book called Find the Lost Dollars, 6 Steps to Increase Profits in Architecture, Engineering, Environmental Firms. And the book is really designed at helping A&E firms make more money on their projects. And my background is working as a Win2 and Dell Tech partner for the last 25 years and doing a lot of implementations and consulting. And this is where I have learned a lot of tricks of the trade and ability to provide hopefully some really hands-on tools today that you can use to help improve your company's scope creep. And I just want to let you know that the reason that I really wanted to do this webinar today is because I consistently see patterns in firms where there's little leaks and holes in their processes around scope creep. And scope creep has a lot of purposes, a lot of reasons associated with it, and we're going to go over some of those today. So you can start to identify those particular issues within your firm. And then I put together a whole lot of my personal recommendations on how you can fix a lot of these problems. So what is scope creep costing your firm? For some of my clients, it could be $100,000. Talk to many of them, it's $500,000, and for some, it's as much as $1 million in a year. And you would be surprised that you would think that would be a very, very huge firm, but you would be surprised that as small as 100 employees could be losing $1 million a year due to scope creep. So we have a question to start off this webinar. I wanted to get some feedback from the group. So Leanne, if you could launch the poll question.
Great. We just would like you to answer for us if your firm currently has a formal documented process for handling requests for extra services. Yes or no? We just want to get an idea from the audience if your firm has a formal documented process. Sorry about the typo in the poll there. I want to get an idea. About 75% of you have voted, so we'll leave it open for another few seconds. We still have votes coming in, so we'll...
Pretty consistent. Looks like it's around 60-40. 60%, 63% are saying no, they do not have a formal documented process. About 38% say yes. It's interesting how those numbers don't add up, but okay. So yeah, we have, it says 63 and 38. It's probably due to some rounding percentages there, but about 63% of you are saying no, you do not have a documented process. And so what we're going to be covering today is what would need to be in a documented process. Is why do you need a process, and what do you need to start doing to get one implemented? And I believe this is the key to saving a lot of money in your firm and getting everybody on board to help you recover all of those dollars that you're losing to scope creep. So the first thing I recommend that you do is figure out how much money you are losing due to scope creep. And we have a little calculator. So I punched in an example of a calculator. It's from our training site. And so a typical firm that had around 1,000 projects a year, that their average project is around $20,000. That's about a $20 million company. If they're just losing 2% of their budget to extra services that are not being recovered on your projects, that's about $400 a project, $400,000 across all your projects, and just a 1% increase in revenue due to captured extra services is $200,000 a year. And I think this is a valuable exercise for all of you to go through, is to try to figure out, based on a similar formula, well, how much money do you really think you are losing due to scope creep? And I think you'll get a better idea of that as we go through this process today and really look at all the little areas that need to be impacted in order to find those lost dollars from scope creep. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is your culture. And culture, Herb Kelleher, the chairman of Southwest, said culture is what people do when no one's looking. And I think that is what people do when no one is looking is often a big surprise to many of our clients. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but it'd be surprising to you if you really go find out what people are doing when you're not looking, what is really going on there. How many of you have had this happen to you on a project? I know this is quite an exaggeration, but in a way it isn't. There have been many projects I hear about with clients all the time where clients come back and want a complete change to the project well into the first or second phase of design process. And it ends up costing architects and engineers a lot of money because clients often don't want to pay for a lot of these changes. They don't want to acknowledge how much it's really going to cost to completely revamp their project. So I think this is the kind of thing, while this is a big exaggeration, adding 4 floors to a building, this is the kind of thing your guys are dealing with out in the field every single day, clients making requests for changes. So the first thing I want to talk about is developing an extra services request process. And many of you indicated that you did not have a documented process. It was interesting. I was talking to one of our clients the other day. He was the CEO of a 150-man firm. And he said to me, I know why we have scope creep. It's because that project manager over there, and he kind of pointed in the direction of the guy's desk. He said, that project manager won't ask for more money. He doesn't like to ask for more money. And I said to him, well, tell me what your documented process says that he should be doing. And he said, well, we don't have one. And I said, that is why he won't ask for more money. Your guys are in a difficult situation. And we're going to talk a little bit about culture, but really there's cultural traps that keep them from asking for more money. 2 of those main culture traps that I write about in my book, one I call quality is everything, which is you really want to do a good job on this project, and you really want to deliver the best project you can. And with that in mind, it's very difficult to say no to things and to rock the boat when clients want to improve the project, or even if one of your own team members wants to improve the project. The other culture trap that really is, I think, the main reason why your guys don't like to ask for more money is it's called keep the client happy at all costs. And really the key there is all costs. We're taught to keep our clients happy. And when we're taught to keep them happy, it's very, very difficult to ask for more money because we don't want to make them unhappy. We don't want to upset them. We don't want to get into a conflict situation. It's very, very uncomfortable. What I have found is that if you have a very detailed documented process that explains to your people what should happen when one of the clients asks for a change to the project, then they feel more comfortable asking for the money. So you really have to put this process together. It should be a document, and everybody in your company should know what's in it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, the best way to do that, how to roll it out to everybody. But a couple things that should be included in this document. It should include language that you want to use when a client request is made. And I'm going to go over that towards the end of the webinar. We're going to talk a little bit about role playing because I think that's a really good way to get your guys more comfortable with getting requests for extra services. So they need to know what is the language I should be using. They need a form or some kind of approval process. It could be in an email. It could be a form that you use to get approval for additional work orders or additional services. But they need to have a document or some kind of form that they would use as a template. They need some methodology to determine how do we determine what it should cost. What is the best way for them to figure that out? Because the person that's being asked for the extra service may not know how to figure out what it's going to cost, and they need to be given very clear instructions of how that process should work. What is the best way to get that quick a cost estimate, because sometimes clients want you to turn these around really fast. And sometimes you could be out in the field and in the middle of a job, and they want you to turn things around quickly. So you need to acknowledge that that might happen, and what should they do in that situation? You need to have an internal approval process. You know, who, what, where, when, how. How do we handle, how does our company deal with this, and how do we get approval for extra services? And then how do we get the client's approval? Because if you don't get it in writing, you're going to run into a lot of conflict later on when you go to try to bill it. And so we recommend that you definitely get a written formal client approval. Now, it could just be an email that says, yes, I approve this scope for this amount of money, and I agree to pay for that. And something as simple as that can really save your butt later on when you go to bill it and you start running into a client saying, I don't remember telling you that I would pay for that. And then the final part of your extra services request process, the documented process, should have a way to track the extra services. You know, how do we set it up in our system? And we're going to talk a little bit later about best practices for doing that, but your process should line up very specifically to your employees what they need to do in order to get extra services approved through your internal processes. The next step is, and the next reason I think that a lot of firms have issues with extra services is they don't take the time to really understand and get a clear understanding with the client up front in the beginning of a project what their real requirements are. And I just want to urge everybody to really focus on that front end piece of your project requirements analysis. And really sit down with your employees and look at what's happening there, because what I have learned over the years is the more time that I spend as a consultant up front with my client, asking a lot of questions, digging deep into what they need and what their expectations are, and really documenting all of those questions and answers in a document, I'm going to save myself a ton of time on the back end of the project, and I'm also going to have a better relationship with the client. And I think ultimately this is really the key to having a really successful project. What I recommend is that you create what I would call a discovery document of some sort. And that discovery document should have a lot of questions that you want to make sure everything is covered with the client. I think a lot of people in their rush to do a proposal, get an estimate out the door, they tend to fly through this process a little too fast and skip over some important questions, or they make assumptions and think that they know the answers. And that can cause a lot of problems on the back end where a client says, well, I thought that was included. And you say, no, that wasn't included, and then you're going to run into problems with the client expecting a lot for free. Some of the things you need to include in this discovery, of course, you want to talk about deliverables, what their expectations are about the deliverables and the level of quality and the timeline for those deliverables. What kind of staff and skill requirements are going to be needed to do the work, how many hours and time it's going to take you to get the estimate done for the kind of things that they're asking for. You want to make sure you have detailed notes about your discussions with the clients, and you're going to want to make sure that you have a good approval process. And if there is an RFP, you want to have a process where somebody goes back and checks your scope against the RFP to make sure that you've really covered all of the important items there. One of the things a little tip that I can give you for creating the discovery document is go back and take a look at all of your projects that are a handful, at least, of projects where you've had some problems, where there's been some major discrepancies between what your company thought the scope was and what the client thought the scope was. Go back and take a detailed look at those projects, interview your project managers, and start to make a list of all the things that went wrong. And then when you have that list of all the things that went wrong, I want you to figure out what could we have done on the front end of the project that would have avoided any conflict or problem later on in our project. And it's very eye-opening to go through this process because very often you have a problem on a project and then you don't deal with it for a while and you forget about it and it might crop up a couple years later. So I recommend you get this and document all this stuff. This is really good. It's very helpful. It's good training for other people in your firm. And the next area where I think firms skimp out a little bit and maybe don't take enough time to really put into when they're developing their scope and proposal is in the actual structure of your estimates. And an estimate really needs to have a very detailed level of phases and tasks. We call that the work breakdown structure. What are all the phases and tasks that are going to be required, the labor categories of the people that we think we're going to need, how many hours we think it's going to take, and how many dollars that's probably going to cost, both cost dollars and billable dollars. And then make sure that you've added some extra money into your project for contingencies and especially for meetings. And be very specific in your estimate how many meetings that are included in the scope. Because I think sometimes that's an area where many firms lose money is in not being very specific, and clients want a lot of extra meetings that they don't want to pay for because they assume that they're already included in the scope of the contract. The next thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is your communications with your team. When we talk about the team should be all-inclusive. What we're going to talk about now is your client and the communications with your client, your subs, the owner, if applicable, any contractors that are involved, your own employees and staff that are going to be working on the project. There's a good set of criteria that need to be developed across the board. I recommend that you come up with a communication plan for every project, like a little checklist of all the communications that need to occur. And I think first and foremost, once you've developed that really good requirements document, after you've done your discovery with your client, you've asked a lot of questions, you really feel like you have a good handle on it, sit down and go over it with them. And make sure that they sign off and they agree, and that there's not anything else that you've forgotten or left off or that they forgot to mention. So I think getting their buy-in early is important. Also, your communication with them around how your firm handles extra services requests, and I think this is really, really important. The kind of language I like to use is, this is how our firm does blah, blah, blah. So this is how our firm handles changes that you've requested outside the scope of the contract. And first we do this, and then we do this, and then we do that, and then we're going to send it back to you, and you're going to approve it, and then we'll move forward. And we're not going to move forward until after you've approved the scope and the amount of the change order. By doing this, you're setting an expectation up front that this is what you're going to be saying to them later on in the project when they come back and ask for something. The second area that I think you really need to focus on is your kickoff meeting. And a lot of companies, I saw a study once that basically said that 60% of A&E firms do not share the entire project scope with their team. And this is really surprising to me because I'm not sure how you can expect somebody to do a great job of knowing what they're supposed to be doing if they've never been given very clear instructions as to what specifically is included in the scope of the contract and what is not included. And so I recommend that you create a kickoff meeting agenda. And that agenda can include things like, introducing team members, an overview of the project scope, a detailed review of the scope and estimate, and a little bit of back and forth conversation, making sure everybody's on board and really understands what is going to happen if anything changes. And also talk about roles and responsibilities and due dates and timeline, the budget, and all of those important things are going to end up affecting the quality and success of your project. I feel like a lot of firms skimp out on the kickoff meeting, don't put enough time and effort into making sure that everybody on the team is really on board and really knows what they should be doing. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is tracking extra services. And this is really, really important. One of the tricks that I like to recommend when you're tracking extra services is to set up a separate phase and task code for extras on every single project that you have, even if you don't think there's going to be a need for it. It's very helpful. You know, when your employees are in there and they're entering their timesheets into the system and they do a lookup on the project, you want that extra services phase to show up. And some firms like to do it as an extra services project. In a minute, we'll talk about why you might want to do it as a separate project. But you know, I feel like it's very, very important to train your employees really well on how they should be tracking extra services. And part of that process we talked about earlier really needs to talk to them about how do they recognize extra services, what do they do, who do they go talk to in the company, their manager, their supervisor, et cetera. You know, if they think that something is outside the scope, what should they be doing? And then that clearly leads to a conversation around how to track it and how to take notes. For example, you may want them to provide a really detailed comment on their timesheet about what they were doing because it might be harder to recover extra services later on. And when you go to bill it, you want to make sure that you have the backup that you need so that the client is going to pay for it and it'll be easier to bill it and collect it. You know, the whole area around timesheet management, I can go on for a whole hour about that because I feel like this is an area where many firms drop the ball. And as many of you know who have read my book or have worked with me, I'm a big fan of daily timesheets. And that's because it's very, very hard for your people to remember what they were doing a few days ago in 15-minute increments. And so by having your employees entering their time every day and requesting and requiring that they record extra services separately, you're going to have a lot easier time later on collecting. And ultimately, that's what we need to do. Where we're going over budget a lot of times on these projects is on scope creep and not being able to bill our clients for these extra services. So it's very, very important to track them in detail on the timesheets. So the next area I wanted to talk about is monitoring your budgets. And, you know, this is good project management, and it's kind of project management 101. But I want to just emphasize it because it needs to be really, really clear to your managers what they should be doing as far as extra services. A lot of people are not looking at their budgets on a very regular basis. And at a minimum, I recommend that they are monitoring their budgets weekly. This is so that they can be really looking at who's charged to their projects, what they've spent, whether they're getting close to exceeding the dollars on each phase, and why. It enables them to go back before they've gone over budget and ask the right questions. Why did it take you so many hours to do this? And maybe because you're not going to get 100% your employees tracking those extra services on those extra codes that we were just talking about. they're going to make mistakes, they're going to forget, they're going to, or not even realize that something was outside the scope. So having regular conversations and regular reviews and monitoring of the budgets is very, very important to keeping the budgets on track and making sure your project managers are really paying attention. The other thing they really need to be focused on is approvals, approving those timesheets on a regular basis. And one of the things I recommend, if you're in the accounting department in your firm, or you have people in your accounting department who are focused on project accounting and what's being spent on projects, I recommend that accounting sits down with your project managers on a monthly basis and looking at metrics, looking at each project in detail to see where that project is at, looking at the revenue, the expenses, the billing, the AR, the multipliers, who are they using on the project, are they on track with the schedules and who they thought they were going to use. And this is good project management practice. It's also going to help you capture more scope creep. You know, project managers are really, really busy these days. I'm hearing stories from some of our clients that their project managers are working 60-plus hours a week because they're a little bit understaffed at that project manager level. They can't bring on enough qualified and experienced people. And so your project managers are really, really swamped. And anything you can do to help them to stay on top of these numbers, to give them a helping hand as far as monitoring their projects, I think that's all going to end up paying off and really helping with keeping those projects on budget, keeping them from going over budget, and also keeping them focused. You know, being that busy, they get mired in details, the daily operations, keeping clients happy again, the quality of the project, the deliverables, and very often the budget is the last thing that they're thinking about. And so anything you can do to help them to stay on top of these project budgets is really going to end up paying off for you. So the next area I wanted to talk about is billing. And if you look at your entire billing cycle from beginning to end, you're going to find a lot of different places where things can be tightened up and improved so that scope creep can be caught. If it's gotten through all the way through all these things we've just talked about, if it's gotten through you know, the client asking and the employee failing to follow the process and failing to record it on their timesheet, and the project manager failing to capture it in their regular project reviews, then ultimately it's going to show up in the billing somewhere. Now, it may or may not show up on the regular project. Hopefully, if you've set up these extra services phases or projects, you're going to see it there. But if they haven't, if they missed all those steps along the way, then finally billing is probably going to be the place where you're going to be able to capture it. So a couple things that you really need to be looking for. If they've gone over budget on any phases or tasks, that's a good place to start. Start digging in and looking, you know, why? Why have we spent too much on these phases and tasks? That's a good place to start looking. Another thing that you really, really want to look at is if they're putting time on hold and they're sitting on it for a long period of time. Or even, I recommend that you look at your work in process on a monthly basis and question everything. Why is this being put on hold? And very often what I found is the time that's being put on hold has to do with something that's going on in the project that they're afraid to bill for. And very often it's one of these issues that's come up where the clients ask for something and they don't quite know how to handle it, or they were afraid to go back and ask for more money. It's some kind of discrepancy, usually in the communication process. So go ahead and look and have a regular review every month of your billing, what's being put on hold, and really question what it is. And then you need to look at it on an aged basis, because if it sits there more than 60 days, I can tell you that it's a very high likelihood that you're never going to bill and collect it. And so you need to set up some policies and some rules internally about time that's being put on hold, how long you're allowed to leave it there. I have one client, one of the things they do is any time that's being put on hold, if it sits there more than 90 days, it gets subtracted from their revenue. So they're on an accrual basis, they're recognizing that work in process as revenue, but if it sits there more than 90 days, they take it off of revenue, and I think that's a great practice to have because they don't want that. They don't want it affecting their current month's revenue. But just pay a lot of attention to that work in process. Another thing, I really do recommend that you bill your extra services on a separate project if possible. And if you bill it separately, then a client won't hold it up, hold up your base project, your core project. They're not going to hold up paying you. You're not giving, if you include it as just an extra phase, you may be able to get paid for it, but there's a possibility that they're going to hold up the entire invoice because of this extra phase that you have. So I recommend, if possible, set up another project that's connected somehow to the core project, maybe the same number with a 0.01 or something, 0.02 after it, but bill it separately on a separate invoice number, so that if they do contest it, if they do hold it up, that it's not going to affect you getting paid on the rest of your projects. So another thing that's really, really important is write-offs. We talked about putting things on hold, but another thing that happens is your project managers or your billing managers, whoever's in charge of billing, may write things off. And I had a policy in my company that had to get approval to write things off, and write-offs were almost forbidden. And you had to have like an unbelievable explanation why you were writing something off. And it's just really important to keep your eye on this, because your project managers, they don't want to deal with the conflict. They don't want to deal with the uncomfortable situation of asking the client for more money. So they'll look at time that's been charged, maybe by somebody who works for them on their project. That person honestly, was doing the work. They put their time on their timesheet, and then they looked at it and they go, I can't bill for that. So instead of going back and asking the client for the money, which really should have happened up front in the beginning of the project, but it didn't for whatever reason, and it could be your firm's fault for not having a tight enough scope and estimate in place, or not having that great communication up front with the client about expectations of the scope. But if that has happened, really analyze these write-offs and make it really clear to your project managers that write-offs are a last-ditch resort thing that you can just really want to avoid at all costs. It's just one of those things that really affects the profitability of your project. It really affects the success of the project. And, in many cases, your client never sees the write-offs. They don't know that you've spent all this extra time on the project and all this extra money, and that you're losing it. And I believe even if you are ever going to write something off for a client, let them know about it. Send them an invoice and then maybe give them a credit of some sort if you have to. But let them see it, because if they don't know about it, then you're not really getting any credit for doing that work and that extra work. And in their eyes, they think everything's just going fine and on track and on schedule and on budget, and they're not going to be paying a lot of attention to it. So another thing that I really want to talk about is educating your employees. And we talked all these things that we talked about are part of a process. They're part of a process that you have internally in your firm. and that your employees really need to incorporate into their everyday behavior. And their everyday behavior is not going to change unless you hold them accountable. So there's really two parts to this training and education process. The first part is teaching them how the process is supposed to work and what your expectations are about how they're supposed to handle all the different scenarios. And I recommend this is very interactive, that you spend a lot of time with your employees talking about the different scenarios that come up and how to deal with them. And the more that you can document, this process and really lay it out for them in detail. You know, when we have this situation, this is what we do. When we have a kickoff meeting, here's the agenda we use. When a client asks for something that's outside the scope, here's the conversation we have, here's the form we fill out, here's the approval process that we go through, here's how we record it on our timesheet, here's how we invoice for it, here's how we deal with conflicts, here's how we deal with clients that are unhappy about the extra services and having to pay for them. I really recommend that the more you write it down, and let me just say something that I think is really critical to this entire argument here, this argument about having a documented process. When you have a documented process that everybody in your company is trained to follow, your employees feel more supported. They feel more confident and supported to go back to your client and ask for the money. They feel like this is how our company does it, and that they're just following the rules. They're just following the process and the policies that you've laid out for them. And when I talked about earlier about my client who is the project manager didn't want to ask for extra services. And if they had had a process in place, that project manager and he was trained well on how to use it, that project manager would not have felt so uncomfortable going back and asking for more money, because the communications up front would have been had with the client, and that client would have known that this is how our firm handles extra services requests. And you know, one thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about team communication, part of that communication needs to be in writing to your client. Putting it in writing in your contract and in your agreements as much as possible. Now, I know your clients have their own contracts, and sometimes they send them to you, and it's very hard for you to edit them. But the more control you can have over that in terms of putting in writing to your client, this is how we handle extra services requests, the better. If your client is a government agency and they have their own specific process for getting things approved, I really recommend making sure you're very well informed about what that is and training your employees to follow their process. Because if you're dealing with a government agency and they have a specific way that change orders have to be handled, then if you don't follow that process, there's no way you're going to get that money. There's just no way. So the more that you can learn about their process and make sure that's well documented in your documented scope create process, extra services process, the more that you can document that for all the different types of scenarios that might come up, the more chance you're going to have that it's going to be successful and that your clients are going to feel happy about what's going on, and your employees are going to feel supported by the organization that when they need to go back and have these conversations that they're doing what they're supposed to do and they're doing what's expected of them. And I think you'll find it won't be as hard for them to have those conversations. You know, many architects and engineers are introverted. Unfortunately, they find it very difficult to have these conversations, and they look at them as being confrontational. And they really don't have to be confrontational. The more training you give them in this area, the more they're going to respond. And the training should be very interactive, where they're, you know, able to give their feedback and maybe even have exercises where they are able to look at different scenarios and how they would handle it themselves. And I think you'll find that with this entire implementing it this way, it's going to make a big difference. So another big thing that you can do is to role play with them. And what I recommend that you do is you get everybody in a room and you come up with some different scenarios that happen frequently. And you might ask your employees to provide some of these scenarios, real scenarios that happened recently. So, you know, reach out to your employees, ask them, or your project managers even, ask them to give you, you know, a couple examples of when a client has requested something that wasn't in the scope, and maybe even a little bit about why they struggled to deal with that specific scenario. And then what you want to do is start to do some role playing. And, you know, take turns where 1 minute they're the project manager, but then they also need to play the client. So you can have some people pretending to be the client, and, you know, they love playing the client. It's really funny. Whenever we do these role-playing exercises with the project managers, they love playing the client because it's easier. They love being the demanding client, saying, I expect you to, you know, I really want you to change this on the project and, you know, change the roof line, and I don't like it, and it needs to be different. And then, of course, there's the aspect of sometimes what they're asking for is going to change the entire structure of the project, or it's going to cost a lot of money. It might affect the entire design. Other times it's just small things here and there. And often what your guys don't realize is that, you know, if you have 10 $250 changes, that adds up to $2,500. So it's not okay to just keep skipping over small things here and there. It's actually easier to deal with them as they come along, right when the client's asking for it, to follow the process that you've established for them. And let me just tell you, one of the objections I hear from a lot of project managers when we're doing this role playing is, I don't like, you know, nickel and diming the client. And I feel like if I'm, you know, every time they ask for something, I'm, you know, I've got to go back and say, oh, that's going to be $250 here, $300 there. I don't like doing that. It makes me uncomfortable. I'd rather save it up till it, you know, reaches a certain amount of money. And if that's the case, maybe there's a better way for you to handle it. And this is where the role playing can come in. So maybe a better way to handle it is to say, I think that's going to cost around $300. If you could just, you know, send me a quick email saying, I'd like you to do this, and I realize it's going to cost $300. You don't have to go through an elaborate process with them. Just say, this is how our firm does it. This is the documentation that's required. If anything goes wrong, it's going to come back on me. I just want to make sure I'm really, really clear on what your expectations are. And we both are so busy, we're both going to forget about this later on. So I want to have it in writing so that we can both remember the conversation that happened today. And saying it like this makes sense. Your client goes, oh, yeah, you're right. We are busy. We are going to forget about it later on. They may even forget later on that they asked for something and go, well, you know, why did you do that? So this helps cover everyone's butt in this situation, makes it really easy. You have these emails. They can be put into your CRM and saved so that it's easy to go back and look at them, or they can be put, you know, in a project folder somewhere and saved. And so one other aspect of the role playing is really that conversation when a client's really asking for something substantial. And that's really, you know, where a lot of project managers get really uncomfortable. And so I like to use language something to this effect. And you could play with this wording, but this is what I have found that really works well. So obviously you never want to say no to a client. And I've found over the years it doesn't go over well saying no. So you always want to say yes, but you want to when you're saying yes, you also want to make it really clear what the consequences of that yes are. So you might say something to the effect of, wow, you know, that's a really great idea, and I can see how that's really going to improve this project. But you know what? That really wasn't included in my original estimate in the scope of our project. So what I'm going to need to do is go back and figure out what that's going to cost. I'm going to take a good look at the impact this is going to have on the project, and then we'll get back together maybe tomorrow or whenever it is that you feel like you can get this back to them. We're going to get back together. We're going to go over it and look at the cost, and then you can decide whether you have it in your budget and you want to add this to the project as an extra service. And then you be quiet and you let the client talk. And so what you're effectively doing is you're agreeing with them, you're being very clear that you're following your company's process, and you're putting it back on your client to make the final decision. It should never be your project manager's decision whether to move forward with an extra. It should always be the client's decision. And so this role playing can really make them feel more comfortable. The more that you can do this with them, the more you can get face-to-face where somebody's pretending to be the client and somebody's pretending to be the project manager, and you're going back and forth. And if you have employees who are not project managers and they need this practice, you know, you can do this role-playing practice. They can do it with their project managers. And this is really good for developing your people and building their confidence. And so when these difficult conversations come up, it won't really feel so unbelievably difficult. So we have another poll question. You may not have the answer, but I'm going to ask you to guess. How much scope creep are you going to recover this year? And I want you to really think about it. I want you to think about how many projects you have and how many dollars. If you could just recover a certain amount of dollars on every project, what would that mean for your company? And the reason I'm asking you this is I really want you to start visualizing in your mind how much money there is at stake here. So we've got people answering the questions.
About 60% have voted, so we can leave it open.
Leave it open another minute.
Yeah, a little bit longer here.
And if any of you really aren't sure, I'm very happy to help you figure it out. It's a very important, when you're trying to implement something like this, it's really important to know what your numbers are. It's really important to get those numbers in front of everybody and to make sure they really understand what's at stake.
Okay, I think that looks like everyone that has voted.
Okay, so the numbers are 59% said up to $100,000. 27% of you said $100,000 to $250,000. 9% of you said $250,000 to $500,000. 2% of you said $500,000 to $1 million, and 2% of you said over $1 million. This is obviously a big problem. So 14% of you said over $250,000. That's obviously money that you'd really, really like to have back. So that's an interesting poll. I'd love to compare that later on when you go back and you figure out what your real numbers are, because if this is important to you and the numbers are there, it is really worth you spending your time and effort to not only develop this process, but to implement it across your company. And that's going to require you to get everybody in your company on board and to some extent to change your culture. Because ultimately, none of this is going to work without accountability. And accountability is really the key to everything that you do in your company that improves and increases your profitability. And what I'm focused on now in my business is accountability and changing our clients' culture so that their culture starts to move towards a culture of profitability and accountability. And that's not an easy thing to do. One of the ways that we have started to do that is we've taken the content of my book my book, Find the Lost Dollars. And I know some of you have read it. I see some, as I said, some familiar names here on the list of who's sitting in the webinar. And we've converted this book into a special online training course for project managers that teaches them business skills all the way from the beginning of a project life cycle of sales and marketing, all the way through estimating and scope creep and project management and utilization and cash flow and time management and even managing client relationships. And what we've done is, which this has been kind of a project that we've been working on over the last year, and we originally went through a pilot program where we had about 60 project managers go through this program. And what we found is that in order to actually change their behavior, we had to go through a process of regular having them take each of the courses, each of the 10 courses, one at a time, and then having in-depth conversations with them in regular meetings to reinforce the expected behaviors, look at the metrics in our company, and really look at what it takes to change their behavior. Because ultimately, if you can change what they're doing every day, and that's what all my clients always tell me is the hardest thing that they have to deal with is getting people to change. You try to put rules and policies in place, and then nobody wants to follow them. And so we have found that by implementing this as a formal program across your company where everybody is involved, including your leadership from accountability standpoint, you can really make a measurable difference in less than 10 weeks. We can see real measurable behavior changes where your employees are actually doing things. Give you some examples. We've had clients where in some of these meetings we've kind of gone around the room and asked the project manager, what are you doing differently? And I've heard things such as, well, I'm now having all of my staff enter their time every day. I'm reviewing it every week. We're tracking our extra services. We're using a go, no-go process that we weren't using before, so we're winning more projects, so we're going after better quality clients. We're spending more time with our clients to understand their requirements. We now understand the reports that are coming out of our system because we have a really good financial management course that teaches them metrics and terminology and how things are calculated. And these are all things that most of our project managers went to college and they learned engineering and architecture, and they never learned business skills. And by really giving them a good foundation and really incorporating into it why these things are so important, and incorporating into it what your own company's real numbers are, and that's really important part of this process, is we have a way for you to put your numbers in there, so everywhere throughout this training, they're seeing your company's numbers pop up. Scope creep is costing us $250,000 a year. And each manager, if they can just find $1,000 every month, and if you have 10 project managers, that's going to give your company an extra $100,000 or more in a year. And over 5 years, that's $500,000. So there's big money at stake here, and I'm very, very, very focused on what it takes to get a company to transform their employees' behavior and put these programs and processes in place so that they really, really work and you can see measurable results in a really pretty fast amount of time. And so one of the things that we decided to do is that we're going to have a webinar on November 9th. It's a Monday in a week and a half from now, and we're calling it Create a Profitable Culture Through Accountable Learning. And accountable learning is a concept that I came up with. And if you go to our blog and you're subscribed to our blog, you'll see that I have an article about accountable learning and what it is, because it's kind of a new concept. But I want you to think back to all the training you've ever done in your company, whether it's been sending your guys to a boot camp or bringing a consultant in, or just doing some in-house training yourself in your own company, and think about, how do we know that worked? Did it work? When these guys came back from the boot camp, did they do anything differently than they had done before? And were we able to really put in new processes and transform our culture easily just by, these kinds of courses and giving them new knowledge? And my belief is that knowledge doesn't change behavior. Behavior is changed by giving them knowledge and then reinforcing it with regular conversations, peer support, peer conversations and discussions, leadership accountability, using metrics and monitoring and measuring on a regular basis so that everybody is very, very clear on what is needed and expected. And so that's what I call accountable learning. You're learning, but you're being held accountable to actually change your behavior and make a difference for the company. And I just want you to imagine everyone in your firm changing their behavior and doing the things that we just talked about today and what that would mean for your company. Many of you indicated it's a lot of money. 14% of you indicated it's over $250,000. And that's every year. And so if you're able to transform your culture with this accountable learning, I think you're going to see that it really, really works. We're having unbelievable, outstanding results with our clients so far. I've been really involved in facilitating the implementation. Most of our clients can do it themselves. We provide guidelines for that. But we're going to be showing you what it really looks like and how it works on November 9th. And I'd love for you to attend this webinar and see what it's all about. But we're going to be showing you what it looks like. It includes assessments and videos. It's very engaging. I realize that project managers and other professionals are really, really busy. They don't have a lot of time in their day to learn this stuff. So they're able to do it in 1-hour chunks every week or every other week. And so over a 10 or 20-week program, you can really transform their behavior. And we're going to have a special discount that we give for our clients through November 15th, but we wanted you to be able to see it and learn more about it on the webinar on November 9th so that you can see for yourself what it is and why it works. And we'll have some more examples for you of some specific things that some of our clients are experiencing when they have gone through this process. It's my goal to ensure that everybody that goes through this gets measurable results. We will, I'm happy to give everybody their money back if they do not see measurable results, but I am 100% confident. I was talking to a client earlier this morning and told them that I believe we can get, 10 times return on investment. There's no reason why you should not be able to do that if you're really focused and committed on making changes in your company. And a lot of the things that we talked about today are really emphasized in this program because it's very, very important. Scope creep is one of the big areas where many, many firms lose a lot of money. But there's a lot of other areas too. I believe there's 8 other critical areas where your firm is losing money, and in the 9 areas I went over in my book are all covered, and I really believe that you can see a very, very big measurable difference. So I hope you got a lot out of our webinar today. I went out of my way to try to give you a lot of good specific examples of things that you can do within your firm and what needs to happen to transform and create a scope creep process. As Leanne mentioned, you're going to be getting an email tomorrow. I'm going to let her explain a little bit more about it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to stay on and answer them right now. Or please feel free to email me and we can connect and have a conversation if you have questions that are more specific to your company and things that you're experiencing. But if you'd like to ask some questions, I'm very happy to answer them now.
Okay, and there are a couple there, June, so I'll let you take a look at the couple of questions or comments that have already been put in. In the meantime, I will just mention, make sure you watch for the email from J. Jewel at AEC Business and check your spam folders in case, but tomorrow morning you will get an email that will have a link to this recording, the PDF of the slides, information on registering for the webinar. Also in the chat on your menu, I put a link in there if you want to go ahead and get registered for that next webinar on November 9th. And then I also want to note that if you requested continuing education credit, we had such a large attendance, it's going to take me a week to 10 days to get those done, but we will be sending out certificates. If it's AIA, we'll get those recorded with AIA, and everyone else that requested a certificate for professional engineering or accounting credits, that type of thing, we'll go ahead and get you out certificates. Again, it'll take about a week to 10 days, but we'll email you those. So definitely check your email tomorrow for more information on the follow-up. But Joan, if you want to address a couple of items that were there real quick.
One question I see is advice for when you're a sub and you have no control over your client requesting extra services from the owner. I think that's there is a couple things. Obviously, it's working with the right clients. And clients being maybe if you're an engineer and you're working with an architect and ultimately they're not, you don't have as much control over the ultimate scope. It's just being very clear about what your scope includes and having a good relationship with that client so that understanding, what needs to happen at the level above them in order to be able to bill for extra services. I do hear from a lot of subs that get into trouble sometimes because the architect redesigns the project and then they're caught up in it, and obviously you can't keep giving away the farm. So, in our client relationship course and in the book, I talk a lot about client selection and about working with clients that you have good relationships with. That when you see this happening over and over again, I just think it's a problem with the client, and ultimately that's where it ends up. Because I agree with you, you're not going to have a lot of control, but just really having as much information as possible about the process they're using, how they are going to deal with extra services, and the more conversations and expectation setting up front that you can do with your client, it's going to ultimately help. But I understand, there is a difficulty there with that. Here's a question. Is the service estimate module a custom edition, or is it part of Deltek Vision out of the box? The example that I showed you, and I wasn't showing you that in order to get you to go, use a specific program or anything. It's just an example of one that I had. The service estimate that you saw on the screen is part of the CRM module in Deltek Vision. So if you own the CRM, you have that. Now, sometimes you have to go into your configuration and turn it on. It may not be turned on, so you may not see it as a tab on your opportunity, but it should be. It's in the Opportunity Info Center. Let's see. I'm just looking to see if we have any other questions. It looks like that's all the questions I see. Leanne, do you see any others that I'm missing?
No, that's it.
Okay, well, I really appreciate your time today. I hope some of my suggestions were useful and valuable for you. And again, I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one, and just feel free to reach out to me and let me know.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.